Mafia boss sees his maid eating in the rain. What he discovers breaks his heart. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. On a stormy afternoon, the cold rain pelted down in relentless sheets as the world outside seemed to blur into a watercolor of gray. The mansion, perched high on the hill, was sheltered from the storm by its thick stone walls and towering windows. Inside, the world was warm and luxurious, a stark contrast to the cruel weather outside. The guests were settled in the grand dining room, laughing, eating, and celebrating the lavish wedding plans of the Mafia boss's son. But outside, in the midst of the storm, there was a sight that would soon change everything. As the storm raged on, the Mafia boss, Dominic Valentino, decided to take a rare moment for himself and stepped outside to the courtyard. His breath was visible in the cold air as he walked across the marble terrace, the heavy rain soaking his tailored suit. It was when he crossed the stone bridge leading to the garden that he saw her. A figure sitting on a weathered bench, head down, arms wrapped tightly around herself. At first glance, it looked like any other poor soul enduring the storm, but as Dominic's sharp eyes focused, he recognized the maid. It was her, Suelli Carter, the black maid who had been quietly working for the family for months, always in the background, always invisible. But today, she was in the open, her body trembling from the cold, eating a small meal from a plastic wrapper, the rain pouring down in torrents around her. Dominic's initial impulse was to walk past, to let the storm sweep her away like it did everything else. He had no time for sympathy, no time for the weak. But something about the sight stopped him. He stood there for a long moment, watching as Suelli ate slowly, as though she had nowhere else to go, no place to hide from. The world. Something inside him shifted. Was it pity? Or something deeper? He wasn't sure, but it didn't matter. He approached her slowly, the sound of his footsteps muffled by the rain. "You're out here in this mess? What are you doing?" he asked, his voice cutting through the rain. Suelli didn't look up at first. She didn't even acknowledge him. She just continued eating, her hands shaking slightly as she lifted the food to her mouth. Dominic stood there, waiting for a response, his heart pounding in a way that surprised him. When she finally looked up, there was no fear in her eyes. Only exhaustion. Only a quiet resignation to her fate. "I'm sorry, sir. I didn't mean to disturb anyone," she said softly, her voice barely audible over the storm. "Disturb anyone? You're out here in the rain, and you think you're disturbing someone." Dominic's voice rose, but there was no anger in it. Just disbelief. She looked up at him, her face pale from the cold, her hair clinging to her forehead. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, Dominic spoke again, his voice softer this time. "Why are you out here?" Suelli looked away, her eyes drifting toward the distant storm. "I didn't want to go inside. It's better out here. I don't belong there." Her words hung in the air, and Dominic's mind raced. What could she possibly mean by that? What was she running from? He couldn't understand, but he couldn't just walk away either. There was something about the sadness in her voice that stopped him from leaving. Without thinking, he reached out and placed his hand gently on her shoulder. "You're not alone," he said. It wasn't the most eloquent thing to say, but it felt right. Suelli looked up at him, startled by the gesture. For a moment, they simply stared at each other, the rain continuing to pour down around them. Then, slowly, Suelli allowed herself to relax under his touch. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. And in that moment, Dominic realized something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years, a sense of responsibility. Not just for the people he controlled, but for the ones who had no power, no voice. No one ever noticed the ones who cleaned the floors or served the food. No one ever saw them as people. But Dominic did. And for the first time in his life, he knew he had to do something about it. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a thick woolen coat. "Take this," he said, draping it over her shoulders. "You're coming inside. Now." Suelli didn't say a word as she stood, feeling the warmth of the coat envelop her, and followed him back inside. The rain continued to fall outside, but for the first time, Suelli didn't feel quite so alone. As Dominic walked through the grand halls of the mansion, He could feel Suelli's hesitant footsteps behind him. She had wrapped the woolen coat tightly around herself, but her shoulders remained tense, as if she didn't fully understand why he was doing this. He wasn't sure what had made him act the way he did. Maybe it was the fact that he had never seen someone so unaffected by the luxury surrounding him. Or maybe it was the way she had looked at him earlier, like she had given up on finding any compassion in the world. He glanced back at her, and she caught his gaze for a split second before looking down, her eyes filled with something close to gratitude, but still guarded. They reached the grand dining room, where the staff was bustling around, preparing for the evening's events. The guests inside were oblivious to the tension outside, too wrapped up in their own worlds to notice what was happening just beyond their walls. The warm lights and the smell of fine food filled the air, a sharp contrast to the storm that still raged outside. Dominic led Suelli past the staff and into a small sitting room. It was one of the few places in the mansion that was cozy, away from the busy corridors where the eyes of others constantly judged. Suelli hesitated in the doorway, clearly unsure if she should enter, but Dominic motioned for her to sit. "You're not going back out there. Not while it's raining," he said, his voice softer now. She nodded, sitting down on one of the plush chairs, looking awkward as though she wasn't used to being treated this way. Dominic couldn't blame her. His family had hired countless servants over the years. All of them faded into the background, invisible and mute. He had never thought much about them. He had always focused on his empire, on power, on keeping control. But now, seeing her shivering in that cold rain, he felt something stir inside him, a feeling he hadn't experienced in a long time. "Do you mind if I ask you something?" he said, sitting down opposite her, his tone still gentle. She looked up, and for the first time, she seemed to consider him as more than just a figure of authority. "What's your story, Suelli?" She hesitated, and for a moment, he thought she might refuse to answer, but then she sighed, her shoulders slumping as if the weight of her life had caught up with her. "There's not much to tell," she said quietly. "I came from a small town, and I've always had to work. My mother is sick, and I just wanted to help her, so I took the first job I could find." Her voice trailed off, and Dominic could see the sorrow in her eyes. He had seen that look before in the eyes of men who had lost everything, but this was different. This was the look of someone who had been beaten down by life, someone who had long ago given up on finding happiness. "You don't have to explain yourself," he said, leaning forward slightly. "But I want you to know something. You're not just a servant here. You're not invisible." Suelli's eyes flickered with confusion, and she shook her head. "I'm just a maid. I don't matter." "Everyone matters," Dominic said, his voice firm. "You may not see it now, but you do. You matter to me." She looked at him, disbelief clear in her expression, but for some reason, it didn't feel like he was just saying words. It felt real, like he genuinely meant it. Suelli stared down at her hands, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable, but it was heavy with unsaid things. The sound of the rain tapping against the windows seemed to fill the space, but it didn't drown out the quiet understanding that had begun to form. "Why did you help me?" she asked, her voice breaking the silence. "You didn't have to." Dominic thought about the question for a moment. "I don't know," he said, his tone softer than before. "Maybe because I saw something in you. Maybe because I didn't want to walk away and pretend I didn't see." "You." Suelli looked up at him, her eyes wide with surprise, and for the first time, she didn't look so lost. "You're not just a maid, Suelli. You're a person, and you're deserving of respect. No one should be made to feel invisible." She didn't answer right away, but the look on her face told him everything he needed to know. She wasn't used to being seen, to being acknowledged for who she was rather than what she did. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Dominic nodded, but there was more he wanted to say. There was more he needed to do. He had spent years building his empire, focused on power, on control, but for the first time in a long while, he realized that there were things worth protecting that couldn't be measured in wealth or influence. "I'm not going to forget what I saw today," he said, his voice low. "And I want you to know, I'll make sure that no one ever treats you like that again. Not here. Not anywhere." Suelli's eyes glistened with unshed tears, and she quickly wiped them away, embarrassed. Dominic didn't comment, but he noticed. He noticed everything. He stood up, his decision made. "Come on," he said, extending his hand to her. "I'm taking you to dinner. You've earned it." For the first time since he had met her, Suelli looked at him as if she truly believed him. She took his hand and stood up, her body finally relaxing as she followed him out of the room, the sound of her footsteps no longer filled with hesitation. As they walked together through the grand halls, the storm continued to rage outside, but inside, a small, quiet change had begun. Dominic hadn't just changed her night. He had changed her life. As Dominic and Suelli made their way to the grand dining hall, a strange feeling settled in Dominic's chest. He had never been the type to care about the well-being of those beneath him, not in this way. Sure, he had been generous in his own way to the people who worked for him, but what he was feeling now was something entirely different. It was almost concern. He glanced back at Suelli, who was still wearing the woolen coat, now more relaxed but still clearly uncomfortable in such an opulent space. They entered the dining hall, where the scent of freshly prepared food filled the air, the clinking of fine china and glasses echoing through the room. The guests barely spared a glance at Dominic as he passed, but some of the staff turned their heads, surprised to see him with a maid in tow. He led Suelli to a quiet corner of the room, away from the bustle of the ongoing dinner. There were no prying eyes here, just the flickering light of chandeliers and the sound of distant conversations. Dominic pulled out a chair for her, an action that startled her. She hesitated, but then sat down, unsure of what to expect. Dominic took the seat opposite her, his usual authoritative presence softened by the unexpected shift in the evening's course. "You've done well today," he said, his voice quieter than usual. Suelli looked at him, her eyebrows furrowing slightly. "I don't understand," she replied, her voice still holding that faint trace of uncertainty. "You helped me. You didn't have to." Dominic paused for a moment, watching her closely. He had grown accustomed to giving orders and seeing them followed without question, but with Suelli, it felt different. There was no arrogance, no power play. There was just a quiet sense of gratitude that he hadn't expected. "Sometimes," he said, "people need someone to notice them, to see them for who they really are, not just what they do." Suelli looked down at the table, unsure of how to respond. She had never been treated like this before, especially not by someone like him. She had spent so many years feeling invisible, doing what was asked of her without any recognition. And now, here she was, sitting across from one of the most powerful men in the world, being treated with kindness that felt foreign. "I don't know if I'm worth noticing," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Dominic's gaze softened. "Everyone is worth noticing," he said, his voice firm. "Especially people who have a lot more to offer than they're given credit for." Suelli met his eyes, surprised by the sincerity in his words. She had always seen him as untouchable, the man who controlled everything, the one who never showed weakness. But now, in the dim light of the room, she saw something else, something that made her feel a flicker of hope. They were interrupted by the sound of the door opening, and a waiter entered with a tray of food. Dominic waved him away with a dismissive gesture, then turned his attention back to Suelli. "We're not here for that," he said. "I wanted to ask you more about your life. Tell me about your family. Why do you do what you do?" Suelli hesitated for a moment, the question catching her off guard. She had never been asked about herself in this way before. But as she looked at Dominic, she saw no judgment in his eyes, no agenda, just curiosity. "I have a mother," she said slowly, her voice low. "She's sick. I've been trying to make enough money to take care of her, but it's never enough." She paused, then added, "I've always had to take care of people, even when I didn't know how to take care of myself." Dominic listened intently, his expression serious. He had heard countless stories like this over the years, but something about Suelli's words struck a chord in him. He could feel the weight of her burden, the way she had been carrying it alone for so long. "You don't have to do it alone," he said, his voice steady. "You can't always carry everything by yourself." Suelli looked up at him, the weight of his words sinking in. For a moment, there was silence between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was as though a shared understanding had passed between them, a silent agreement that things were different now. "I've been doing this job for so long," Suelli said, her voice breaking slightly, "and I've never asked for anything in return. I've always felt like I didn't deserve more." Dominic leaned forward, his gaze unwavering. "You deserve more, Suelli. Everyone does." For the first time, Suelli felt something shift inside her. She had spent so many years believing she was invisible, that her efforts were never enough, that she was just a cog in a machine that never stopped. But Dominic was telling her she mattered. And that thought, that simple truth, was enough to make her heart swell. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. Dominic smiled, a rare softness in his features. "You don't have to say anything," he said. "Just know that you're not alone anymore. I won't let you be." The words were simple, but they carried so much weight. Suelli felt a warmth spread through her chest, the first real warmth she had felt in a long time. It wasn't the heat of the room or the food that had been brought in front of her. It was something deeper, something more meaningful. And in that moment, she knew that things were changing. Things were about to be different. Dominic watched as Suelli took the first bite of her meal, a quiet but satisfied expression crossing her face. For a moment, the world outside seemed to disappear. The sounds of the mansion faded, the laughter of guests muted, and all that remained was the two of them in that small, intimate space. She hadn't said much since their conversation began, but Dominic could see the shift in her demeanor. The tension had melted from her shoulders, and her eyes, once filled with exhaustion, now held a glimmer of something he hadn't expected: hope. She looked up from her plate, meeting his gaze with a look that conveyed a mix of gratitude and disbelief. "I never thought I'd be sitting here, eating this kind of food," she said softly. Dominic leaned back in his chair, watching her carefully. "You deserve to eat in peace, without the storm or the rain or the worry." Her eyes flickered briefly to the window, the storm still raging outside, but she didn't flinch. Instead, she nodded, as if coming to terms with the fact that her life was beginning to change. For the first time, she felt that maybe, just maybe, someone cared about her well-being. "I've always been told I had to do everything myself," Suelli continued, her voice a little steadier now. "But this is different. You're different." Dominic's eyes softened. He had always been the one to take control, to command respect, but there was something about Suelli's quiet strength that moved him. She hadn't asked for help. She hadn't begged. She had simply carried the weight of the world on her shoulders, without complaining. And now, here she was, sitting across from him, allowing herself to be seen. "You don't have to do it alone anymore," Dominic said, his voice low, sincere. "You have people now. People who care." Suelli's breath hitched at his words, and for a moment, she couldn't speak. She had never known kindness like this. In her world, people came and went, using her, taking from her, but never offering anything in return. She had learned long ago not to expect anything from anyone. But Dominic was different. He was offering her something she hadn't asked for. He was offering her respect. As the evening continued, the conversation shifted to lighter topics. They spoke about things Suelli had never dared to hope for: her dreams of a better life, the places she wanted to see, the future she had put on hold for so long. Dominic listened intently, occasionally asking questions, his interest genuine. It wasn't like the other conversations she had had with the people around her, the ones who treated her like an invisible part of the furniture. With Dominic, she felt like she mattered. When the meal was over, Dominic stood up, extending his hand to her. "Come on, let me show you something." Suelli hesitated, looking up at him with a mix of curiosity and uncertainty. "What do you want to show me?" "A place where you can have some peace," he replied, his voice soft. Suelli stood, still unsure, but trusting him enough to follow. He led her out of the dining room and down a corridor, past rooms filled with fine art and antiques. They reached a quiet wing of the mansion, where the sounds of the storm seemed distant, muffled by thick walls. Dominic opened a door, revealing a small library, filled with bookshelves stacked with leather-bound volumes. The room was cozy, with a fire crackling softly in the hearth. "This is my mother's favorite room," he said, stepping inside. "She used to come here to read when she needed to think." Suelli stepped inside, her eyes wide with wonder. She had never seen a room like this before, warm, inviting, and peaceful. "I want you to know that you're welcome here," Dominic continued. "Whenever you need a place to get away from it all, this is yours." Suelli blinked, unable to fully grasp the words. A place for her? In this mansion? It felt surreal. She had spent her whole life being told where she belonged and where she didn't. No one had ever offered her a space of her own, a place where she could be more than just a servant. I don't know what to say," she murmured, her voice shaky. "You don't have to say anything," Dominic replied. "Just know that you have a place here. You're not just a maid to me." Suelli felt the tears welling up again, but she quickly blinked them away. She wasn't sure what this feeling was. Relief? Gratitude? Maybe even a little bit of fear. Fear of the unknown. Fear of what this change might bring. But for the first time, the fear felt manageable. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice full of emotion. Dominic smiled, a rare and genuine smile that softened the sharp edges of his usual expression. "You don't need to thank me," he said. "You're part of this family now. And families take care of each other." The weight of his words settled over her, and for the first time, she felt like she truly belonged somewhere. They stood there in the warm glow of the fire, the storm still raging outside, but inside, everything felt different. Suelli had never expected to find herself in a place like this. She had never expected to be seen, to be heard, to be treated with kindness and respect. But now, as she looked at Dominic, she realized that everything had changed. And maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something new. The days that followed felt like a dream to Suelli. The weight of the world that had pressed down on her for so long seemed to lift, even if only just a little. Each morning, as she awoke in the comfortable guest room Dominic had provided, she was reminded of how much had changed in such a short time. The heavy rain had passed, but the sense of relief she felt was as clear as the sky outside. As she made her way through the mansion's halls, she couldn't help but notice how different everything seemed now. The staff no longer treated her as just another part of the background. There was a shift in the way they looked at her, a newfound respect that had never been there before. She had noticed the way Dominic had started to treat her too. He was kind, thoughtful, and always checked in on her, making sure she was comfortable. He would ask about her day, about what she liked, and even about her dreams. It was strange, but it was also heartwarming. For the first time in a long while, Suelli found herself smiling more. She was still cautious, still unsure if this new life was real, but each day with Dominic and the other staff helped her believe it a little more. She had never thought she would feel this way, like she was worth more than just the work she did. That morning, Dominic invited her to join him for breakfast in the grand dining room. The table was set with fine china, and the air smelled of freshly baked bread and brewed coffee. Suelli hesitated as she walked into the room, but Dominic immediately stood and waved her over. "Come on, sit with me," he said with a smile. "It's just us today, no formalities. Let's have a meal without any pressure." She smiled back, feeling the warmth of his words. She took a seat across from him, and they began to talk. They spoke about many things, from the books Suelli had started reading to the music she enjoyed. Dominic shared stories about his childhood, about his mother, and how she used to make him sit down for meals together, teaching him the value of family. As they ate, there was no pretense, no masks. It was just two people having a conversation, sharing a meal. Suelli had never imagined this kind of interaction could be so normal, so natural. For a moment, she forgot she was in the mansion of one of the most powerful men in the city. She felt like she belonged, like she was finally part of something. After breakfast, Dominic suggested they take a walk in the garden. It was a peaceful day, the sun shining down gently, the flowers in full bloom. As they walked, Dominic asked her more about her life, about her mother's health and how she had been coping with the stress of working multiple jobs. "You don't have to keep working like that," Dominic said, his voice soft. "If you need anything, I can help." Suelli shook her head gently. "I've always worked hard. It's just what I know." "I know," Dominic replied, his gaze softening. "But that doesn't mean you should carry all the weight alone. I mean it when I say you don't have to. You have a place here." Suelli stopped walking for a moment, looking at him. She had never allowed herself to truly believe someone cared about her well-being. People had always taken from her, never giving anything back. But here was Dominic, offering her kindness, offering her a chance at a different life. She didn't know how to process it. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice full of emotion. "For everything. I don't know how to explain what this all means to me." Dominic smiled, his eyes sincere. "You don't need to explain. Just know that you're not alone." They continued walking, the sound of their footsteps the only thing breaking the silence between them. As they reached the far end of the garden, Dominic stopped and turned to face her. "Suelli," he said softly, "I want you to think about something. You've been working so hard for so long, and I know you've been taking care of others. But now it's time to take care of yourself. It's time to think about your future, not just your past." Suelli looked up at him, the weight of his words sinking in. She had always been defined by the work she did, by the sacrifices she made for others. But what if she could live for herself, just for once? What if she could have a future where she wasn't just surviving, but truly living? She didn't know what that looked like, but for the first time, she was willing to find out. "I'll think about it," she said, her voice quiet but determined. Dominic nodded, his expression softening. "Good," he said. "Take your time. But when you're ready, I'm here to help." They stood there for a moment, the quiet calm of the garden surrounding them. Suelli felt a warmth in her chest, a sense of peace she hadn't known she needed. It wasn't just about the meals, the kindness, or the comfort of the mansion. It was about the feeling of being seen, of being valued. She didn't have all the answers, and she wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time, she felt like she had a chance to create something for herself, to live in a way she never thought possible. And that thought, that hope, was enough to make her believe in the possibility of a better life. The days following their conversation in the garden felt different for Suelli. The weight she had carried for so long, the burden of always being the one to take care of others, began to lift, just a little. As the sun shone through the windows of her guest room each morning, she couldn't help but feel a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. Dominic's words from the garden echoed in her mind. "It's time to take care of yourself." She had never allowed herself the luxury of thinking about her own needs. Her life had been about survival, about doing for others, about giving without expecting anything in return. But now, there was something new in her heart, a quiet stirring, a flicker of hope that perhaps it was time for her to consider her future. That night, Dominic had invited her to dinner again. This time, it wasn't the lavish spread of before. Instead, it was a more intimate meal, just the two of them, a simple but delicious homemade dish Dominic had prepared himself. Suelli had never expected a man like him to spend time in the kitchen, but there he was, cooking with a skill that surprised her. As they sat down to eat, the conversation flowed easily, the weight of the formality from earlier in the week gone. Dominic asked her more about her life, about her hopes and dreams. Suelli found herself speaking more freely than she had in years. She spoke about her dreams of one day owning a small café, about how she had always loved baking and cooking but never had the chance to pursue it. She spoke about her mother's condition, how she longed to give her a better life, a life without the constant struggle. Dominic listened, his gaze soft and attentive, no judgment in his eyes, just the genuine care of someone who was truly present in the moment. "You should pursue that," he said when she finished speaking. "Your dream of having your own café. You're more than capable of making it happen." Suelli laughed softly, a little embarrassed. "I don't know. It feels so far away. It's not like I have the resources or the time for something like that." Dominic leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving her. "You don't need everything all at once. What you need is the belief that it's possible. And I'm here to help you with that." Suelli was silent for a moment, her eyes lowering to her plate. She had always thought her dreams were too far out of reach, too big for someone like her. But sitting across from Dominic, hearing him speak so sincerely, made her question. Those beliefs. Could she really have a future beyond the walls of the mansion, beyond the work she had done for so many years? Could she really dream again? As if sensing her thoughts, Dominic continued. "Everyone starts somewhere, Suelli. No one wakes up with everything they need. But if you have the right support, if you have someone who believes in you, that's all you need to get started." She looked up at him, her heart pounding. His words hit her differently than anything anyone had ever said to her. They weren't just empty promises or kind words meant to soothe. They were genuine. He genuinely believed in her. It was a strange feeling, one she had never experienced before. The sense of someone truly seeing her, truly valuing her. After dinner, Dominic stood up and walked toward the small window that overlooked the garden. The evening was calm, the only sound the occasional rustling of the leaves in the breeze. He turned to face her, his expression thoughtful. "I want to make sure you know," he began slowly, "that you don't have to do this alone. If you need help with anything, whether it's the cafe or your mother's care, you have a place here." Suelli stood up, her heart swelling with emotion. She had never known someone like him, someone who offered help without expecting anything in return. She had always been the one giving, the one making sacrifices for others. But now, for the first time, someone was offering her a chance at something better. "I don't know how to thank you," she said quietly, her voice trembling. Dominic smiled, the warmth in his eyes making her feel a little less vulnerable. "You don't have to thank me," he said. "Just take the first step. That's all I ask." Suelli nodded, a lump forming in her throat. She had spent so many years feeling like she was stuck, like there was no way out of the life she had known. But now, with Dominic's support, she felt like she had the chance to create something of her own. Something real. Something hers. "I'll think about it," she said, her voice full of determination. "And when I'm ready, I'll take that first step." Dominic's smile widened. "I know you will. I'm proud of you already." The words were simple, but they meant more to her than she could say. As the night wore on, they spent the rest of the evening talking and laughing, the connection between them deepening in ways that Suelli hadn't expected. For the first time, she felt like she was more than just a maid. She was someone who mattered. And that realization, more than anything, gave her the strength to believe that her dreams were possible. The following days felt like a shift in the very air for Suelli. She had begun to see herself differently, to think about her life in ways she had never considered before. Dominic's words had stayed with her, the offer of support, the belief that she could be more than just a maid. And as time passed, she found herself spending more time with him, not just as his employee, but as someone he genuinely seemed to care about. One evening, after a particularly long day of work, Dominic invited her to the terrace overlooking the vast garden. The setting sun painted the sky with hues of gold and pink, casting a peaceful light over everything. The mansion, with its marble floors and elegant decor, felt distant from the storm that had raged just a week ago. "I was thinking about what you said the other night," Dominic began as they stood together by the railing. "About starting the café. I think it's a great idea, and I'd love to help you get started." Suelli turned to face him, surprise and gratitude filling her expression. "You mean it? You'd really help me?" "Of course," he replied, his voice steady. But there was a warmth to it that made her feel as though he truly meant what he said. "I know people in the industry. I can get you advice, resources, even help you find the right space if you need it." Suelli's heart began to race. She had always dreamed of owning her own café, a place where she could bake and serve food with love, but it had always felt like an impossible dream. Now, with Dominic's support, it suddenly felt within reach. "But I don't even know where to start," she said, her voice filled with uncertainty. "I don't have any experience in running a business. I just know how to bake." Dominic smiled, his eyes softening. "That's the hardest part, isn't it? But it's also the easiest. The business part can be learned. The passion you have for what you do, that's the most important thing. And you have that." Suelli took a deep breath, looking out over the terrace, trying to imagine it all. A café. Her café. It felt surreal, like a dream she had tucked away, but now it was starting to come to life. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't even know how to begin to thank you." "You don't have to," Dominic replied. "But you can start by believing in yourself. And taking that first step." He paused for a moment, his gaze drifting toward the horizon. "I know what it's like to be stuck in a place where you don't feel seen, like you don't matter. But you do. You matter. And I'll help you see that." The sincerity in his voice made Suelli's heart swell. She had never expected someone like him to care about her, to see her as more than just a servant. But here he was, offering her a future, offering her a chance at something more. They spent the rest of the evening talking about her plans, discussing the steps she would need to take, and Dominic offered his help, guiding her with patience and encouragement. The next few weeks passed in a blur of excitement and nervous energy. Suelli began working on her business plan, meeting with people Dominic knew in the industry, and slowly piecing together the pieces of her dream. Every day, she felt a little more confident, a little more sure that this was possible. Dominic continued to be by her side, offering guidance, introductions, and, most importantly, his unwavering belief in her. One afternoon, after a long meeting with a potential investor, Suelli sat in her small office, staring at the documents in front of her. It felt like so much to handle, but when she closed her eyes, she could almost picture the cafe. The smell of fresh pastries, the sound of customers chatting, the warmth of a place that was truly hers. She had come so far from the woman who had sat outside in the rain, invisible and unsure of her place in the world. Now, she was building something that was entirely her own. The phone rang, pulling her from her thoughts. She picked it up, and a voice on the other end greeted her. "Suelli, it's Dominic. I just wanted." to check in. How are things going with the cafe plans? It's going really well, Suelli said, a smile spreading across her face. I have some things lined up, and it feels like it might actually happen. It's starting to feel real. Dominic's voice softened. I knew you had it in you. Suelli felt a rush of emotion. She had heard those words so many times before from others, but hearing them from him, someone who had never known her before, someone who had seen her at her lowest, meant everything. Thank you, she said again, her voice full of gratitude. I couldn't have done it without you. Dominic's response was simple, but it was the most reassuring thing she had heard in a long time. You did it, Suelli. I'm just here to help you along the way. As they spoke, Suelli realized something. This was not just about a cafe or a business. It was about the fact that she had found someone who saw her, who believed in her. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel invisible. She felt like she mattered. And as she looked out the window, watching the sun setting over the garden, she knew that the future was hers to shape. She was no longer just the maid. She was a woman with a dream, with a future, and nothing would stop her from achieving it. Suelli woke up early the next morning, the sun just beginning to peek over the horizon. The house was still quiet, and for a moment, she allowed herself to simply sit in the peace of the moment. It felt like a rare gift, this calm, and she was learning to appreciate it. The weeks had passed quickly, and every day brought her closer to something she had never dared hope for. The cafe was no longer just a dream, it was becoming a reality. She had found the perfect location, a small, charming space near a bustling street that would attract plenty of foot traffic. With Dominic's help, she had secured a loan, and the renovations were already underway. As she sat there, sipping her coffee, Suelli couldn't help but think back to the moment when everything had started to shift, the moment Dominic had believed in her when she had never believed in herself. She had come so far since that night in the rain, when she had been nothing but a tired, invisible maid, stuck in a cycle of survival. Now, she was building something of her own, something that would allow her to care for herself and for her mother in ways she had never imagined. The sound of footsteps in the hallway broke her reverie, and she looked up to see Dominic entering the room, his usual confident strides softened by a warm smile. Good morning, he said, his voice casual but filled with affection. Suelli smiled back. Good morning. Dominic poured himself a cup of coffee and sat down across from her. How are things going? He asked, his gaze studying her intently. Suelli felt a rush of gratitude. It wasn't just about the business anymore. It was the way Dominic had supported her, believed in her, from the very start. Everything's moving forward, she said. The renovations are on schedule, and I've got the staff lined up. It's a lot to manage, but I think it's going to work. Dominic nodded, clearly pleased with her progress. You've done an incredible job. I knew you would. His words were simple, but they held so much weight. It was the kind of praise she had always longed for, but never expected to hear. Thank you, Suelli said softly, the words carrying a weight of their own. I couldn't have done it without you. Dominic reached across the table, his hand covering hers for a brief moment, a gesture that sent warmth flooding through her. You could have, he said, his voice steady, but you didn't have to do it alone. For a moment, Suelli was speechless, overwhelmed by the truth of his words. She had always thought she had to do everything herself, that no one would ever offer help without expecting something in return. But Dominic had shown her something different. He had shown her that there was strength in accepting support, in letting others help her when she needed it. I think I'm starting to understand that, she said, her voice quiet. That it's okay to let others in. Dominic smiled at her, the warmth in his expression making her heart flutter. Good, he said. You deserve to let others in. And you deserve all the success that's coming your way. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of planning and organizing. Suelli met with the contractors to discuss the final touches on the cafe's design, while Dominic handled some of the business details. By noon, the place was buzzing with activity, and Suelli felt a sense of excitement that she hadn't felt in years. As the day wore on, she found herself more and more grateful for everything she had. The cafe, the support of Dominic, and most of all, the sense of purpose that had been rekindled inside her. That night, as they sat together at dinner, Suelli found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. The path had not been easy, but it had led her to a place she could never have imagined. She looked across the table at Dominic, who was talking about a new business opportunity, his voice steady and confident. She had learned so much from him, not just about business, but about what it meant to be seen, to be valued. For the first time in her life, Suelli felt like she wasn't just surviving. She was living. She was thriving. After dinner, as they moved to the small sitting room by the fire, Dominic turned to her. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice thoughtful. "About the future." Suelli raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "Well," he began. "You've got the cafe. You're starting to build something of your own. But what about the bigger picture?" Suelli felt a knot form in her stomach. "What do you mean, bigger picture?" "I mean," Dominic continued, "what happens next? Where do you see yourself in 5 years? 10 years? Suelli was quiet for a moment, considering his words. She had spent so much of her life focused on the present, on getting by, that she had never really thought about the future. But now, with the cafe taking shape, with everything starting to fall into place, she realized that there was more for her. More than she had ever imagined. "I don't know," she said slowly. "But I think I want more. More than just the cafe. More than just surviving." Dominic smiled, a small but knowing smile. "I think that's the first step," he said. "Realizing that you can have more." Suelli smiled back, her heart swelling with hope. For the first time, she didn't feel trapped by her past, by the limitations she had once believed were her only option. The future was wide open, and she was ready to walk into it. And as she sat there, beside Dominic, by the fire, she knew that whatever came next, she was no longer alone. The next few months passed in a whirlwind of activity. Suelli's cafe was finally starting to take shape. The space that had once been a shell of empty walls and dusty floors was now filled with the smell of fresh pastries, the sound of sizzling skillets, and the vibrant energy of her new life. Each day brought new challenges, new lessons, but it was all worth it. She had never felt so alive. Dominic had been a steady presence throughout the process, guiding her with a calm and patient hand. He had introduced her to people in the business world, helped her navigate the complexities of running a cafe, and, most importantly, believed in her every step of the way. But beyond the business, Suelli knew that Dominic had become someone more to her, someone who had opened her eyes to a world of possibilities she had never known. One evening, as they stood together in the cafe, Suelli looked around, feeling a swell of pride. The soft glow of the lights reflected off the polished countertops, and the small tables were filled with customers chatting over coffee. It was a modest beginning, but it was her beginning. "You've done it," Dominic said, his voice warm as he watched her take it all in. "I always knew you had it in you." Suelli turned to him, a smile spreading across her face. "I couldn't have done it without you." Dominic chuckled softly. "You could have. You just needed to believe in yourself." The words felt like a quiet truth she had learned over time, with his help. "I think I'm starting to believe," she said, her voice filled with quiet determination. "And now that I believe, I can see all of this. This is just the beginning." Dominic's expression softened, and for a moment, they both stood there, just taking in the moment. "I'm proud of you, Suelli," he said. "You've worked hard, and you've built something real." The words hit her differently than they ever had before. She had heard people tell her they were proud of her in the past, but this was different. Dominic wasn't just saying it out of politeness or obligation. He meant it. It was something she had never felt before, a deep sense of pride in herself, a pride she had never allowed herself to feel. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice full of gratitude. As they stood there, the noise of the cafe swirling around them, something inside Suelli shifted. She had come so far. From the woman who had been hidden away in the background, unsure of her worth, to this woman standing in her own cafe, making decisions, building something that was truly hers. It felt like a rebirth. The next few weeks were a blur of excitement and growth. The cafe became a hit in the neighborhood, with regular customers returning day after day, drawn to the warmth of the place and the delicious food. Suelli's confidence grew, and with it, the dream she had once held so closely in her heart began to expand. But as the cafe flourished, Suelli found herself facing a new challenge, one she hadn't expected. Her relationship with Dominic was changing. It wasn't just about business anymore. Their conversations had shifted from planning and strategies to more personal topics. They talked about their pasts, their hopes for the future, and the things they wanted from life. But as their bond deepened, Suelli began to realize something she hadn't allowed herself to acknowledge before. She was falling for Dominic. At first, she tried to brush it off, to convince herself that their connection was simply professional. He had been there for her when no one else had, guiding her, supporting her. But the way he looked at her now, the way he smiled, the way his presence seemed to fill the room, it was different. She felt the pull, the warmth that radiated from him, the way he made her feel seen, understood, and cherished. One evening, after a particularly busy day at the café, they sat together in the quiet of the back office, the soft hum of the refrigerator the only sound. Dominic looked at her, his gaze steady, as if he was trying to gauge her thoughts. "Suelli," he began, his voice softer than usual, "there's something I need to ask you." Suelli looked up from her papers, her heart suddenly pounding. "What is it?" "I've been thinking a lot about us," he said, his voice filled with an honesty that made her breath catch. "About everything we've been through together. And I don't want to keep pretending that this is just business anymore." Suelli's mind raced. She had known something was shifting between them, but hearing him say it aloud made it real. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Dominic stood up and moved closer to her, his gaze never leaving hers. "I mean that I care about you, Suelli," he said quietly. "More than just as a friend or a business partner. I care about you, about your future, about everything you've worked for. And I can't ignore that anymore." The words hung in the air, and for a moment, Suelli didn't know how to respond. She had never allowed herself to believe that someone like Dominic, someone with so much power, so much control, could feel that way about her. But here he was, standing in front of her, his emotions laid bare. She swallowed hard, her voice barely a whisper. "I care about you too, Dominic." The words felt foreign on her tongue, but they were true. She had been holding back, afraid to let herself feel what she truly felt. But now, standing here, with him, she realized that she didn't have to be afraid anymore. They had both come so far, and maybe, just maybe, they could walk this new path together. Dominic smiled, the warmth in his eyes making her heart flutter. "I'm glad to hear that," he said softly, "because I don't want to keep pretending either." The air between them shifted, the weight of the unspoken finally lifted. Suelli didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in her life, she felt like she was ready to face it. With Dominic by her side, she knew that anything was possible. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of change, and with each passing day, Suelli felt herself growing stronger. The cafe was thriving, the community had embraced her, and every customer who walked through the door brought a new sense of pride. But amidst the joy of building something from the ground up, there was still something simmering under the surface, something she had been trying to ignore for weeks. Her feelings for Dominic had grown deeper, undeniable, and though she had tried to focus on the business, she couldn't push aside the emotions that had blossomed between them. It wasn't just the way he supported her or the kindness he had shown her when no one else had. It was the way he looked at her now, the way he made her feel valued not just as a business partner, but as a woman, as someone worthy of love. One evening, as they sat together in the back office of the cafe, Dominic's eyes held hers longer than usual, and for a moment, everything else seemed to fade. He reached across the table, taking her hand gently, the touch warm and familiar. "Suelli," he began, his voice low and serious, "I've been thinking a lot about us, about what comes next." Suelli's heart skipped a beat. She had expected a conversation about the business, about the cafe, but this felt different. She could feel the tension in the air, the weight of the words that were about to be spoken. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Dominic hesitated, and for a moment, Suelli feared he might retreat, that he might pull away. But then he leaned in, his gaze never leaving hers. "I mean that I want something more with you, Suelli. Something beyond this business, beyond our partnership. I care about you. A lot." The words hung in the air, and for a moment, Suelli couldn't breathe. She had known deep down that this was coming, that the connection between them wasn't just professional anymore. But hearing him say it out loud made everything feel real. "I care about you too," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I didn't want to complicate things. I didn't want to risk what we have." Dominic smiled gently, his thumb brushing over her hand. "I know," he said, "but I'm not worried about complicating things. I'm worried about letting this go, letting the chance for something real slip away." Suelli felt a rush of emotions. She had always kept a wall up, always protected herself from the vulnerability of love. But here, in this moment, with Dominic, she felt something shift. Maybe it was the way he had always been there for her, the way he had given her a chance when no one else had. Or maybe it was the way he made her feel seen, valued, and loved for the first time in her life. "I've never felt like this before," Suelli admitted, her voice shaking with emotion. "I don't know what this means, but I want to find out. With you." Dominic's smile widened, and in that moment, Suelli knew she had made the right choice. She wasn't just building a business. She was building a future that included Dominic. The next few weeks were filled with excitement and new beginnings. Suelli and Dominic navigated this new chapter of their lives together, the cafe continuing to thrive and their relationship deepening with each passing day. They spent time together outside of work, enjoying simple moments that made everything feel even more real. But with the good, there came challenges. As their relationship grew, so did the scrutiny. The other staff members began to whisper, unsure of how to handle the change in their dynamic. Some of the customers, too, took notice, their curious glances raising doubts in Suelli's mind. Was she really ready for this? Was she ready to step into a world where her relationship with Dominic could be seen as something more than just business? One evening, as they sat together after the cafe had closed for the night, Suelli shared her concerns with Dominic. "What if they don't understand?" she asked, her voice tinged with anxiety. "What if people see this as something that could ruin everything we've worked for?" Dominic's gaze softened, and he reached out, taking her hand in his. "Suelli," he said gently, "it's not about what they think. It's about what we know. We've built something amazing together. The cafe, this relationship, it's real. And it doesn't matter what anyone else thinks. What matters is that we're in this together, and we trust each other." Suelli looked into his eyes, feeling the sincerity of his words. In that moment, she knew he was right. It wasn't about what anyone else thought. It was about them, about the trust they had built, the connection they shared. As long as they had each other, they could handle whatever came their way. The next morning, Suelli walked into the cafe with a renewed sense of confidence. She was no longer the quiet maid hiding in the background. She was a woman who had built something from the ground up. A woman who had found love, trust, and a future she never thought was possible. As she worked alongside Dominic, creating new dishes, meeting customers, and planning for the future, she realized that she had finally found the life she had always dreamed of. A life full of purpose, love, and the courage to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Together, with Dominic by her side, she knew that nothing was impossible. The weeks that followed were a blur of success and growth. Suelli's cafe had exceeded every expectation, becoming a beloved staple in the neighborhood. The warm atmosphere she had dreamed of, filled with the rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee and homemade pastries, was now a reality. The cafe was bustling with customers, the soft murmur of conversation and laughter filling the air, and the sight of Suelli moving between the tables, talking to guests, managing the kitchen. It was everything she had wanted and more. Yet, even with all the success, something had changed between her and Dominic. It wasn't anything overt, but there was an undeniable shift. The deeper their relationship became, the more they were faced with the complexities of blending their professional lives with their personal lives. For the most part, they worked seamlessly together, but the pressures began to mount as they navigated the world of business and the world of love. One evening, after the cafe had closed and the last customer had left, Suelli sat at the small table near the window, looking out at the empty street. The soft glow of the streetlights cast long shadows on the pavement, and for a moment, the silence felt heavy. Dominic joined her, sitting across from her with a concerned look on his face. "What's on your mind?" he asked, his voice gentle but steady. Suelli took a deep breath, unsure of how to articulate what had been weighing on her. "I don't know. It's just, everything is moving so fast," she said, her voice quiet. "The cafe is doing great, but sometimes I feel like I'm losing myself in it. Losing what we've built together." Dominic's expression softened, and he reached across the table, his hand finding hers. "Suelli, I get it. This has been a huge change for both of us. But I want you to know that we're in this together. The cafe, this relationship, everything. It's ours, not just yours, not just mine. We're building something together." Suelli nodded, feeling the weight of his words sink in. She had always been the one to carry the burden, to make things work on her own. But Dominic was right. They had built something beautiful together, and she wasn't alone anymore. I just don't want to lose sight of us, she said softly. Of what we've built, of what we're becoming. Dominic squeezed her hand, his gaze unwavering. You won't lose me, Suelli. I promise. We'll figure this out together, step by step. The warmth in his voice reassured her, but there was still a lingering doubt in the back of her mind. She had always feared that once things started going well, she would somehow sabotage them, or that the very success she had worked for would lead her to lose the one person who had believed in her the most. Over the next few weeks, they worked together to find balance. They set boundaries, creating time for themselves outside of the café. They took walks, went on quiet dinners, and made sure that their relationship remained at the forefront, not just their work. But even as they grew closer, Suelli knew the reality of their situation. Dominic was still the powerful Mafia boss he had always been, and Suelli was still the woman who had come from nothing, working tirelessly to build a life of her own. They lived in two worlds that, at times, felt impossible to reconcile. It wasn't until one late evening, as they sat together at the café, that the weight of it all truly hit Suelli. She was finishing a few orders when Dominic appeared at the counter, looking at her with a mixture of concern and warmth. Suelli, there's something I need to tell you, he said, his voice serious. She wiped her hands on the apron and walked over to him, sensing the change in his tone. What's going on? She asked. Dominic hesitated, his gaze shifting for a moment. I've been asked to take on more responsibility, more territory in the business. It's a big decision, and it's one I need to make soon. Suelli's heart skipped a beat. She had heard about the complexities of Dominic's work, but she had never fully understood the weight of it. What does that mean for us? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. I don't know, he said, running a hand through his hair. It could mean more time spent dealing with family business, more distractions, more danger. And I don't want that for you. I don't want to drag you into that world. Suelli felt a not form in her stomach. She had always known the dangers of Dominic's life, but hearing him say it out loud made it all the more real. She had built a life for herself, something that was hers, something that gave her purpose. But she knew that if she stayed with Dominic, she would have to face the world he came from, a world that was far from the safety she had worked so hard to create. I don't want to lose you, she said quietly, her voice trembling with emotion. But I also don't want to lose what I've built. What we've built. Dominic looked at her, his eyes softening. Suelli, you won't lose me. But I need you to know that whatever happens, I'll always protect you. You're a part of my life now, and I won't let anything come between us. The sincerity in his voice gave her some comfort, but the uncertainty still lingered. The future was uncertain, and no matter how much they loved each other, they both knew that the world they lived in was complicated. As the evening drew to a close, they stood together in the café, their hands entwined. The street outside was quiet, the only sound the soft hum of the city. We'll figure this out, Dominic said, his voice steady and sure. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together. Suelli nodded, feeling a mixture of fear and hope swirling inside her. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't alone anymore. And together, they could face anything. As the days passed, the weight of Dominic's new responsibilities began to settle in. The business he ran wasn't just about the café or the family's affairs. It was much bigger than that. He was being pulled in different directions, and with every meeting and decision, Suelli felt the distance between them grow. It wasn't that he was neglecting her. It was that his world was consuming him in ways she hadn't fully anticipated. She had known from the beginning that his life was complicated, but now she was seeing it firsthand. One evening, as they sat in the small office in the back of the café, Dominic's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and for a brief moment, the light in his eyes flickered. Suelli noticed, but didn't say anything. She could tell that. The business was weighing heavily on him, that there were decisions he had to make that would affect not only the café, but his family's legacy. I'm sorry, Suelli, Dominic said, his voice strained as he put the phone down. There's more on my plate than I expected. I know, she replied softly, her gaze gentle. But I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. She wanted to comfort him, but the truth was, she didn't know what to say. She understood the pressure he was under, but there was a growing unease inside her. Their relationship, which had started with so much promise, was beginning to feel more like a burden than a blessing. The café was thriving, but with Dominic's increasing involvement in the family business, he wasn't there as often as he used to be. She could feel it, the subtle shift in their dynamic. She didn't want to be a burden to him, but she couldn't ignore the feelings she had. She had spent so long feeling invisible, and now, in this new chapter of her life, she wasn't sure where she fit in. I just don't want to lose what we've built, Suelli said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't want to lose you. Dominic stood up, walking over to the window, looking out into the quiet streets. His posture was tense, the weight of the world on his shoulders. You won't lose me, he said finally, his voice thick with emotion. But this world, the one I'm in, it's not simple. It's not just about us. There are people who count on me, who depend on me. Suelli nodded, understanding. She had always known that Dominic's world was dangerous, full of complications and secrets. She had always accepted that, but now, the reality of it felt suffocating. She had always dreamed of a peaceful life, a life where she could be free of the burdens that had defined her for so long. But with Dominic, she was constantly pulled back into a world she wasn't sure she belonged to. I want to be a part of your world, Dominic, she said, her voice trembling with vulnerability. But sometimes, I feel like I'm losing myself in it. I don't know how to balance everything. Dominic turned to face her, his expression softening. I never wanted you to lose yourself, Suelli. I care about you. Too much for that. But I don't know how to fix this. I don't know how to make things easier for you without sacrificing the business, without sacrificing everything I've worked for. Suelli stood up and walked toward him, closing the distance between them. She placed a hand on his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her palm. You don't have to fix everything, she said softly. I just need you to be here with me. We can face things together. For a moment, they stood there in silence, the weight of the situation pressing down on them. Dominic's gaze softened, and he placed his hand over hers, holding it against his chest. I want to be with you, he said, his voice full of sincerity. But I'm torn between what I have to do and what I want. And right now, I don't know how to make both work. Suelli felt a pang in her chest, the uncertainty of their future settling over her like a heavy fog. She had always believed that love was enough, that two people could overcome anything if they cared for each other. But now, standing here with Dominic, she realized that sometimes love wasn't enough. Sometimes, the world they lived in was too complicated, too dangerous, for love alone to solve. I understand, she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. I just need to know where I fit in all of this. Dominic looked down at her, his eyes filled with conflict. You fit in my life, Suelli. I just need to figure out how to keep you in it without dragging you into everything else. The words were heavy with unspoken truths, and Suelli knew that things couldn't stay the way they were. She loved him, but she couldn't keep sacrificing herself for the sake of a life that felt increasingly distant from the one she had dreamed of. I'm scared, Suelli admitted, her voice shaking slightly. I'm scared that I'll lose you, that I'll lose everything we've built. Dominic reached for her hand, holding it gently in his. You won't lose me, he promised, his voice soft. But we need to figure this out. Together. Suelli nodded, the uncertainty still lingering in her chest, but for the first time in a long while, she felt like there was a chance. Maybe it wouldn't be easy, maybe it wouldn't be simple, but together, they could find a way forward. As they stood there, their hands entwined, Suelli knew that the road ahead wouldn't be without its challenges. But she was no longer afraid of facing it alone. She had Dominic by her side, and that was enough for now. The months that followed were a time of healing and growth. Suelli and Dominic had found a new balance between their personal and professional lives. The café was thriving, becoming a cornerstone of the community, and Suelli's confidence had blossomed in ways she hadn't thought possible. She was no longer the woman who had been hiding in the shadows, uncertain of her place in the world. She was a business owner, a woman who had worked tirelessly to create something real. Dominic, too, had found a way to balance his family obligations with his feelings for Suelli. His world was still complicated, still dangerous, but he was learning to navigate it with her by his side. They had faced their doubts, their fears, and the uncertainties of their relationship, but they had come out stronger. It wasn't perfect, and there were still challenges ahead, but they knew they were in this together. One evening, as they stood in the café after closing, Dominic turned to Suelli, a smile on his face. I've been thinking, he said, his voice gentle but filled with meaning. You've built something incredible here. I've watched you grow in ways I didn't expect. Suelli smiled back, the familiar warmth spreading through her. I couldn't have done it without you. You believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. Dominic took a step closer to her, his eyes filled with affection. I'll always believe in you, Suelli. You've shown me that there's more to life than power and control. You've reminded me that there's strength in vulnerability, in allowing yourself to care for others. Suelli's heart swelled at his words. It had been a long journey, and they had both changed along the way. Their love had been tested by the realities of their worlds, but it had endured. I never thought I could have everything I wanted, she said quietly. I thought I was just meant to survive, to get by. But now I feel like I'm living. Like I'm finally living for something that matters. Dominic reached out, taking her hand in his. You are Suelli, and I'm right here with you, every step of the way. As they stood together, hand in hand, Suelli felt the weight of everything they had overcome. There was still uncertainty in the world they lived in, still challenges to face. But for the first time, she wasn't afraid of what the future held. They would face it together, building a life that was their own, one step at a time. The cafe had started as a dream, a small idea that seemed impossible. But now, it was a symbol of everything they had accomplished, everything they had fought for. It wasn't just a place for food and coffee. It was a place where dreams were nurtured, where love and ambition coexisted, and where they had both found a home. As they stepped outside into the cool night air, the soft hum of the city in the background, Suelli looked up at the stars. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel lost. She felt found. She was exactly where she was meant to be. And with Dominic by her side, she knew that they could face anything the future held. The road ahead wouldn't always be easy, but it was theirs to walk, together. In this captivating journey of growth and transformation, experience the inspiring romance stories that explore the power of love, self-discovery, and overcoming obstacles. Follow the story of Suelli, a woman who starts as an invisible maid, hidden in the shadows, and her rise to becoming a successful cafe owner. Along the way, she encounters Dominic, a powerful figure from a dangerous world, who believes in her when no one else does. Their bond deepens as they navigate their professional and personal lives, facing challenges together. As their relationship grows, Suelli learns to embrace her dreams, finding strength and support in Dominic's unwavering belief in her. This heartwarming narrative is a perfect example of romance stories that show how love can transform lives, help people grow, and empower them to chase their dreams. The story reveals the beauty of vulnerability, the importance of believing in each other, and the unspoken strength of a shared future. If you are a fan of romance stories that blend passion, ambition, and the journey to self-empowerment, this story is for you. Follow Suelli's journey and witness the magical moments of love and personal growth unfold in ways that only true romance stories can deliver.